All those in favor of the amendment say aye. All those against say no. The ayes have it. And the question is, Clause 130 as amended stands part of the bill. And all those in favor say aye. The clause is 104. As amended stands part of the bill. And all those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Clause 104 as amended stands part of the bill. That brings us to the end of the consideration stage. You don't. Thank you very much. Honorable Majority Leader, do you proceed with item 5?
That is so, Mr. Speaker. We can now deal with item number 5.
Item listed 5, Minister of Lands.
And Mr. Speaker, if I may, the minister is out of town, so we will engage, if we indulge the Deputy Minister to hold the fort for the minister and move the motion listed as item number 5.
Yes, Honorable Minority.
Speaker, I believe our colleague, the Deputy Minister, invoked Order 131, which earlier was to arrest the third reading of the bill by the minister. Having gone through the second consideration stage, I'm sure it's understandable for the Deputy Minister to move for the third reading on behalf of the minister. Thank you.
So we can make progress. Yes, Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to move that the Land Bill 2019 be now read the third time. And, Mr. Speaker, in so doing, I wish to say that
Yes, Minority Leader. Honorable Minority Leader.
Right, Honorable Speaker, I second the motion.
Thank you very much, honorable members. The motion has been duly moved and seconded. I'll put a question. All those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it.
An act to revise and consolidate the laws on land with a view to harmonizing those laws to ensure sustainable land administration and management, effective land tenure, and to provide for related matters.
The Land Bill 2019 is duly read the third time and passed. Item listed 8.
Mr. Speaker, item number 7.
Number 7?
Item 7.
Yes. Procedural motion. Honorable Minister for Aviation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that motion number 7 on page 3 of today's order paper, that notwithstanding the provisions of Standing Order 81,
Honorable, please don't read it all.
Thank you.
Please move it without reading it all.
I so move, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Who seconds the motion, the procedural motion? Thank you very much.
Right, Honorable Speaker, I second the motion.
The procedural motion has been duly moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Motion number 8. Honorable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the Aircraft Accident Investigation and Prevention Bill 2020 be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, the bill we're seeking to move is a simple, straightforward bill that seeks to establish the Accident Investigation Bureau that would investigate, prevent, regulate, and establish the management of accidents and incidents that occur within the country. Mr. Speaker, we all know that airport operations and air transport operations are fairly safe and very fundamental in moving people and goods from place to place and also generating significant revenues for national development. Mr. Speaker, Ghana has done quite well in this regard and is regarded highly globally for doing so well in the aviation sector. Since 2012, Mr. Speaker, Ghana has recorded, unfortunately, 4 major accidents and numerous serious incidents, some involving deaths of persons and damage to property. Mr. Speaker, since the President established the vision of making Ghana the aviation hub of West Africa, Ghana has done its best to try and attain this vision. Since 2019, Mr. Speaker, we've been able to amend the Ghana Civil Aviation Act 2004, Act 678, and Section 25 mandated the Minister to be able to issue ministerial directives to get the operations of accident investigations done as a unit within the Aviation Ministry. Mr. Speaker, research has shown under international civil aviation functions that we need to set up an autonomous body to be able to do this independent of the ministry, independent of the authorities. Mr. Speaker, therefore, the nation seeks to be able to enhance its status globally by resorting to best practice and setting up an autonomous and independent investigation body. The experience we've noticed in other parts of the world, Mr. Speaker, even some close to home like Nigeria, Ethiopia, Tunisia, and others far away like Singapore, Qatar, and the United States of America, autonomous aircraft accident investigations within their jurisdictions. Mr. Speaker, we seek under this bill to ensure that an independent body is established and that we are able to produce the results that are acceptable globally, that will make Ghana stand tall in the Committee of Nations as far as the investigation is concerned. Mr. Speaker, the proposed transformation of the Bureau into an independent bureau by the establishment of the bill would therefore empower the Bureau to function efficiently and effectively, and its findings will invariably receive international credibility whilst promoting air safety and positive national image globally. Mr. Speaker, as I indicated earlier, this bill is simple, straightforward. It's meant to enable us to set up an autonomous entity outside the ministry, and this bill, therefore, Mr. Speaker, if so passed, would help us to be able to get into the status where the nation would be one of the best in the world, given the high record that we established last year. Mr. Speaker, in these few words, I beg to move the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Honorable.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I rise to associate myself with the motion on the floor, and in so doing, Mr. Speaker, I want to present your committee's report. Mr. Speaker, I want to seek your indulgence and ask the Hansard Department to pick the entire report as I read highlights of the report. Mr. Speaker, I'll go straight to objectives of the bill. The objective of the bill is to establish an autonomous aircraft accident investigation and prevention bureau, a corporate body to investigate, prevent, regulate, and enable management of aircraft accidents that occurs in the country. Mr. Speaker, the Aircraft Accident Investigation and Preventive Bureau Bill 2020 put Ghana in a league with national and international ICAO obligation and best practices and its compliance with international aviation standards. The passage of the bill, Mr. Speaker, is expected, among others, to boost Ghana's case in being aviation hub of West Africa. The committee recommends to the House to approve its reports and pass the Aircraft Accident Investigation and Prevention Bureau Bill 2020. Objective to the attached amendment, that is Appendix A, in accordance with the requirement of ICAO for member states. I respectfully submit them, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Honorable, you have not formally seconded the motion. Very well. Now, there will now be a full debate on the principles of the bill and in line with the accompanying memorandum. Yes, Honorable.
Right, Honorable Speaker, I rise to speak in support of the motion, and in so doing, Mr. Speaker, I make a few observations. Mr. Speaker, as said by the Minister and the Chairman, Ghana's credentials in the aviation industry is growing. Indeed, in 2019, Ghana Kotoka International Airport was adjudged the best improved in Africa, not even in West Africa. It is simply because of the investment and strategies that have been taken over the years. Significantly, the improvement at Terminal 2 and Terminal 3. Mr. Speaker, I want to draw the attention of the Minister and the Chairman to this. We are trying to establish the Accident and Incident Investigation Bureau. This is based on ICAO annexes, especially Annex 13 and 26. What that annex talks about is aircraft accident and incident investigation. However, the motion moved is for Aircraft Accident Investigations and Prevention Bureau. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, not all situations involving aircraft end up in accidents. Some are just incidents, as pointed out by the Minister. So we need to be clear whether we are setting up a bureau to deal with aircraft accident and incident investigation and prevention bureau. So the Minister can take that on board and deal with it at appropriate time. Mr. Speaker, the creation of this body gives Ghana the opportunity to have an independent body. But arguably, Mr. Speaker, as others said, the President will be appointing the Commissioner under Article 195, and the same President will be appointing the governing body under Article 70. How independent they will be depends on the people actually who will be carrying out this. I know it's not peculiar to this, but that is what our Constitution says, that the President appoints these people. Mr. Speaker, the setting up of this bureau per se may not deal with the issue. We would have to set up this bureau and resource them appropriately to be able to do what is expected of them. I hope that this bureau, when established, would not have undue government influence, and they will be able to carry out their mandate according to the ICAO conventions. Mr. Speaker, when we get to the stage of doing the bill itself, I just want to draw the attention of colleagues. Maybe 80% of the clauses are lifted directly from the ICAO conventions. So it is not necessarily the case that when we take a clause and you don't like it, you can say, I want it this way. Mr. Speaker, that is not permissible. Contracting countries once you sign the convention, you cannot change some of the conventions. I see the minority leader shaking his head. You cannot, majority leader, sorry, you cannot fundamentally change any of the provisions contrary to what the annexes say in the clause. I know we haggle over is or in this house for a long time. Mr. Speaker, I want to shorten my presentation by saying this is a very good thing to further enhance the credentials of our country. We believe when this bureau is set up, it will make or consolidate Ghana's position as an aviation hub in the sub-region. But we believe that the investments that were made, that made Ghana a beacon of aviation in Africa, needed to continue. We need to do more in investment in aviation. Setting up the bureau alone may not be enough. I know we are on a downturn currently because of COVID, but God willing, we shall rise again as a country in aviation and be able to do these things and to make sure civil air travel in our country a safer way of travel for everybody. Mr. Speaker, with these few words, I support the motion and urge colleagues to equally support the motion for the establishment of the bureau. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable. Yes, Honorable.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to associate myself with the motion. Mr. Speaker, the Aircraft Accident Investigation and Prevention Bureau is the right thing to do at this moment in time. Mr. Speaker, when you take the Ghana aviation industry currently, per capita, we are the aviation hub for West Africa. Mr. Speaker, and therefore, establishing this bureau is important by moving it from administrative arrangement to an autonomous independent body. I believe that the reports of this committee in investigating and publishing in the prevention of further accidents is key to growing our aviation industry. Mr. Speaker, if you take countries like Nigeria, Ethiopia, Tunisia, Singapore, Qatar, Netherlands, United States of America, among others, have already established their bureaus, and this has enhanced their aviation industry. In fact, if you take a country like Egypt, their engineering department alone employs over 5,000 engineers. The total Egypt Air arrangement gives employment of over 35,000. And therefore, the aviation industry is one key industry that when we do it well and sustain it properly, we are sure to use it to create employment for our own people. In fact, it is for this reason that I support the creation of this bureau, because when everybody knows that Ghana is safe, more planes will be landing in Ghana and more jobs will be created in Ghana. Mr. Speaker, in passing or working on this bill, it also gives credence that Ghana adheres to recommendations that are usually given to us by auditors. In fact, in the last International Civil Aviation Organization validation mission in Ghana in 2019, Ghana scored very high. And in fact, at the last General Assembly, Ghana was awarded. In fact, it was taken by the Honorable Minister of Aviation, Honorable Kofi Adda, in Montreal, Canada. Clearly, that shows that Ghana is doing something. That shows that Ghana is up there. But it cannot be up there if we don't sustain it. And that is why it is important that an accident and prevention bureau bill is well done in this house and passed accordingly into an act so that we can appoint the commissioners and make sure that the work that they do, which currently is on an ad hoc basis, can be more sustainable. In fact, the last time we did an investigation on just a simple excursion of an aircraft on a runway, the Speaker, it took us more than 4 months, and it cost us so much money to do so, and it was not sustainable. It is time that we have an agency that is independent, that is autonomous, and that can stand the test of time, so that when they investigate and they publish everywhere in the world, they can comply to the standards that the world is looking up to. With these few words, Mr. Speaker, I wish to support and associate myself with the motion. Thank you very much.
Very well, Honorable.
Thank you, Right Honourable Speaker. I also rise to support the motion on the floor. Mr. Speaker, in speaking to the motion, I just want to make two brief comments on the report. One of it is to share an observation. Airports and countries are rated by the International Civil Aviation Authority. Mr. Speaker, by passing this bill in this House, what it would do is to give Ghana a star rating in the aviation sector. And once Ghana has a star rating in the aviation sector, not only would it, put us in good light, but it gives workers in Ghana in the aviation sector an opportunity to go and do part-time work in other airports across the country, across the world. Mr. Speaker, having said this, the second issue is the funding of the activities of this bureau. Mr. Speaker, aircraft accident and incident investigation is very, very expensive. I'm glad that 5% of the airport tax would be used to fund the activities of the bureau, 5% of the airport tax. But, Mr. Speaker, we need to be sure, 1.5 rather, we need to be sure it is done in a manner that gives the bureau a lot of resources, taking into consideration the expensive nature of investigating incidents and accidents. Mr. Speaker, I say so because currently airports around the world are not operating at full capacity. So what that means is that the airport tax that countries get may not be enough, judging by the fact that flights are not flying regularly. So in passing this, we would have to have at the back of our minds that probably from now till sometime next year, airports may not be fully operational, and for which reason we need to lock some funds to be able to support the bureau in times when the civil aviation industry is not having a lot of resources to do its work. Finally, Mr. Speaker, there's a correction on page 1, the last paragraph of the report. We don't need the word "to," so it should read, its enviable reputation predates Ghana's attainment of independence, and that should be taken into consideration. With this, I want to thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to speak to the report, and urge my colleagues to support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable. Yes, Honourable.
Mr. Speaker, it has been suggested that since this bill is dependent or is in furtherance of a treaty that Ghana has entered into, with regards to when we come to the consideration of the bills, we should, as it were, hold our horses in terms of trying to change anything, since we have signed the treaty and therefore are bound by the terms of the treaty. Mr. Speaker, I found that curious until I averted my mind to Article 75(2) of the Constitution. And with your permission, if I may read, it says that the President may execute or cause to be executed treaties, agreements, or conventions in the name of Ghana, and a treaty, agreement, or convention executed by an order under the authority of the President shall be subject to ratification by an act of Parliament. And so, Mr. Speaker, it seems to me that what we'll be doing basically is, by this act of Parliament, ratifying the agreement that Ghana has entered into. So therefore, I agree with the general principle that our hands are, as it were, tied when it comes to the provisions of the act or the bill, which have been, as it were, taken away or duplicated from the treaty that we have signed. Mr. Speaker, there is no doubt that it is important. It's a good bill, and I do not share the concern of the possibility of lack of independence. Mr. Speaker, the Constitution must be seen as a whole. Public officers are bound by, for example, Article 23 of the Constitution, which says that administrative officers must act in a certain way. We are also mindful of Article 296. So, Mr. Speaker, I wholeheartedly support it, and I pray that members also are in agreement with the Executive, the Ministry of Aviation, and support the passing of this bill when the time comes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minority Leadership.
Mr. Speaker, with your indulgence, I yield to the Honourable Nelson Dafanaport to conclude for the Minority Leadership. Thank you.
Very well.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to add my voice for the call of this House to adopt the present report. And Mr. Speaker, in doing so, it's very important that we understand the procedure that the House is adopting in handling this report. Mr. Speaker, on the 14th of this month, the bill was presented and read for the first time. And pursuant to Article 106, Mr. Speaker, with your leave, if I may read. Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Article 106, subclause 4, and it states that whenever a bill is read the first time in Parliament, it shall be referred to the appropriate committee appointed under Article 103 of this Constitution, which shall examine the bill in detail and make all such inquiries in relation to it as the committee considers expedient or necessary. Mr. Speaker, if I may add Article 106, subclause 5, it says where a bill has been deliberated upon by the appropriate committee, it shall be reported to Parliament. Mr. Speaker, this is the procedure the House is adopting, and it's also in pursuance of our own standing orders, as in Standing Order 189. Mr. Speaker, the government underpinning the agency to passing this bill, Mr. Speaker, is contained in paragraph 3 of the Minister's letter to the Office of the President. Indeed, in paragraph 3 of that letter, it detailed the circumstances under which the passage of the bill into an act will help to further improve our standing in view of the impending ICAO committee that will be arriving in the country to conduct another review in 2021. Mr. Speaker, the other essence of considering the bill and the certificate of urgency is further contained in paragraph 3 of the report from Cabinet to the committee, which also detailed. In essence, it speaks of the fact that during the 2029 ICAO visit to the Republic of Ghana for a review, 2019 visit of ICAO team to the Republic of Ghana to conduct another review, they recommended strongly that the existing bureau as an administrative wing of GCA be actually converted into an independent body capable of handling the matters that the bill seeks to be says with. So, Mr. Speaker, we are proceeding on the Constitution, what it says that we should do. Mr. Speaker, I believe that it would be important for us to appreciate a few air accidents that have happened in this country, which makes it very imperative that this bill be passed quickly so that we can be in readiness for 2021. Mr. Speaker, in 1978, a Navarro Cessna jet crashed near Takrady, and it killed 4 people. Mr. Speaker, in 1981, a Ghana Airways flight on a local routine maneuvering also crashed 10 kilometers from the Kotoka International Airport. Even though there were no casualties, the ground damage was severe. Mr. Speaker, in 1983, there was another accident experienced by the Kotoka International Airport. And indeed, in 1985, Mr. Speaker, as recently as 1998, a private jet was involved in an accident at the airport, and a crew of 2 men and 3 passengers were on board, and they perished. Mr. Speaker, In 2000, a Ghana Airways flight with flight number GH200 with a crew of 10 and a 44-man passenger on board was involved in an accident and 7 persons died. And Mr. Speaker, and there have been recent accidents. So, Mr. Speaker, it's very important that this bill is passed quickly so that we can ready ourselves for the tax ahead. Mr. Speaker, may I refer you to the concluding paragraph of the report. Specifically, if you look at paragraph 7, subparagraph 1 on page 8 of the report. And it states that if we are able to establish this particular bureau, it will serve the needs of the aviation hub of West Africa. And Mr. Speaker, on this note, may I urge the House that in approving the report, the Minister takes steps to also operationalize the whole airport as an aviation training hub to serve the aviation needs of the West African hub. Mr. Speaker, on this note, I urge the House to approve the report. I thank you very much.
Majority leadership. Any contribution?
Mr. Speaker, we
Honorable
defer
Majority
to
Chief Whip.
the Honorable Member for Bantama, Mr. Daniel Chemabwaji, to speak on our behalf.
Honorable Member for Bantama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to contribute to the motion that is being discussed on the floor right now and to make contribution to the principles underlying the bill that is before us. Mr. Speaker, as a member of the committee, I had the opportunity to participate in the review of the bill, and Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to commend the Minister and the Ministry for a good job that they did so far. We're expecting to go through about a day or so, but because of how clean it was, we were able to do it. Mr. Speaker, air transport is very important, especially looking at where we are in our development process. And for that matter, any attempt to improve what we have done over the years to actually cement our name and image in the industry is quite important. So I believe that the creation of the Bureau to investigate accidents and incidents and to do prevention is a step in the right direction, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I believe that we know since 2012 we've had 4 accidents. It is important that we take steps to create this bureau to make it quite autonomous, to begin to do more of prevention so that we don't have to wait to get ready before a disaster happens before we'll be able to do this. Mr. Speaker, as part of the government's agenda to make West Africa the aviation hub, Ghana the aviation hub of West Africa, I believe sincerely that this bill, when it is passed, is going to enhance our ability to achieve that vision. And not only that, Mr. Speaker, I believe that creating an independent or autonomous bureau to do the investigation will also align Ghana's practices in line with the international best practices. And I believe the findings and the work of the Bureau, because they're so independent, will be enhanced. It will be probably done very well, effectively, and also enhance our credibility in respect of whatever happens if, God forbid, there is an accident and we have to come up with findings. So, Speaker, this Bureau, as we speak, exists, except that it is an administrative unit within the Ministry of Aviation. So trying to make it an independent autonomous is pretty much basically improving what we already have. And so, and any opportunity to do so, Mr. Speaker, should not be let go. So, Speaker, I believe that given the fact that we would like to develop, given the fact that even though we are going through COVID and its effects, this is the right opportunity for us to be able to work on this bill. And I encourage the rest of my colleagues to support, because I believe this will help us to achieve our mission of making Ghana the aviation hub of West Africa. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Honorable members, at the conclusion of the debate, all those in favor of the motion say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it.
An act to establish the Accident Investigation and Prevention Bureau to investigate, prevent, regulate, and oversee the management of accidents and incidents that occur in the country and to provide for related purposes.
The Aircraft Accident Investigation and Prevention Bureau Bill 2019 is duly read a second time. Honourable members, item listed for motion. Honourable Minister for Finance. Honourable Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I hear some members asking where is the Finance Minister. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister has been with us and he is in the Speaker's holding room. Mr. Speaker, I brokered an agreement with the Minority Leader and we thought to be able to handle items 9 and 10 before the Finance Minister walks in. Unfortunately, because we spent so long a time on the aviation bill, we believe we should call him in to do item number 4. We should call him in to deal with item. So, Speaker, the man has been here in the presence of this House. You see him in body and spirit. You see him in body, spirit, and soul. In a few moments from now. You guys just wait.
Honourable Hussein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today is a special day in the calendar of Parliament. Yes. Consistent with the requirement of a Minister of Finance to present to the people of this country through Parliament the mid-year review. The Minister of Finance should be eager to do that with alacrity. And so, in a house like this, on this day, you should be here listening even to what we are discussing.
Speaker said notice yesterday.
You should be here. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, this is not how we sit. This is not how we sit in this house. But because of the importance of the event, the Speaker yesterday gave directives for the rearrangement of the hall and refused to receive visitors to protect us from coronavirus. The Minister is not here.
3 hours.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday you gave an indication that the House will start at 10 o'clock. It's 1 o'clock now.
And where is the Finance Minister?
Now, where is the Finance Minister? Mr. Speaker,
But where is the Finance Minister? It's not in the business.
the Finance Minister will not come until he is ushered into this house.
Why?
Why will the Finance Minister be ushered into this house?
Because it's supposed to have examination.
We know that we accord parliamentary privilege and respect to 2 people in this country, including the Speaker. 3 people in this country, including the Speaker. When the Speaker is entering this our house, he is ushered in, and we have to stand to receive him. When the President is entering this house, he is ushered in, then we stand to receive him. When the Vice President, in the absence of the President, is entering this house, we rise to receive him. We have never reason to receive a Finance Minister, neither have we ever ushered him in this house. So the finance minister is the majority leader.
And he's late.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can see the finance minister being ushered in. Mr. Speaker, the finance minister.
Now guys, 3 hours late.
Mr. Speaker, the finance minister has been ushered in. And after 3 hours of our ceremony. But we can understand. This probably might be like his last media review. So we can understand. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, for the record, it must be stated that the finance minister got to this house at exactly 9:30. For the record, he was here at exactly 9:30. Mr. Speaker, the member who just spoke said that the finance minister is not ushered into the house. We have seen finance ministers whose entry into this house has been serenaded. We have seen finance ministers whose entry into this house has been serenaded. Serenaded. Not mere ushering. Serenaded into this house. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. So I don't know where the member for Tamale Central is coming from. But I should inform the member for Tamale Central that clapping is not known to this house. He was clapping when he was talking. And Mr. Speaker, the clapping ushered in the finance minister. The clapping ushered in the finance minister. And this house should be grateful to him for the clapping that he did, which ushered in the finance minister. Mr. Speaker, I believe the house is now ready to listen to the finance minister. Thank you very much.
Item listed 4. Honorable Minister for Finance. Item 4.
Right, Honorable Speaker, Honorable Members of Parliament, on the authority of His Excellency President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, I beg to move the Honorable Members of this august House approve the mid-year review of the budget statement and economic policy of the Government of Ghana and supplementary estimates for the 2020 financial year, which I present today, 23rd July 2020. Mr. Speaker, I'm performing this function in accordance with Article 179(8) of the 1992 Constitution, Standing Order 143 of this august House, as well as Section 20 of the Public Financial Management Act 2016, Act 921. Mr. Speaker, this statement is an abridged version of the mid-year review of the budget statement and economic policy of the Government of Ghana and supplementary estimate for the 2020 financial year. I would like to request the Hansard to capture the entire mid-year review of the budget statement and economic policy of the Government of Ghana and supplementary estimate for the 2020 financial year. Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to thank God for the privilege and extend my appreciation to His Excellency the President for the opportunity to lead this important assignment in managing the public finances of this country. I am grateful to God for His grace, mercy, and goodness towards us. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, when we look back at where we were and where we are now, we cannot help but to be grateful. Mr. Speaker, my prayer every morning from Exodus 13, 14, is to ask, and I quote, "The Lord, if you are pleased with me, teach me your ways. But remember that this nation is your people, and may your presence go with us." Mr. Speaker, when we took over the management of this economy in January 2017, things were dire. We were recording the lowest growth in history in most of our critical sectors. Expenditures in sectors like education, agriculture, and health that address the basic human needs of our people were low. This had resulted in low productivity, deteriorating standards of living, and general despondency. There was a general lack of opportunities for social advancement for our fellow Ghanaians. Our governance institutions had also been deprived of the needed resources to play their critical role. Mr. Speaker, through well-thought-out economic and social policies underpinned by our belief in the ingenuity of our people and improving the well-being and livelihoods of Ghanaians, we set out to restore macroeconomic stability for growth and sustainable jobs, to promote economic freedom by ensuring social mobility and social justice, invest in human capital to improve the lives of Ghanaians, strengthen the PFM system to protect the public purse, and enhance governance institutions by providing more and adequate resources. Mr. Speaker, from 2017 to date, through the diligent implementation of this plan, we managed to completely change the story. Mr. Speaker, not only should we acknowledge what God has done by turning this country around, but we should celebrate his continuous favor on this land. Mr. Speaker, the running theme undergirding all our policies and expenditure plans has been a commitment to invest and improve the lives of Ghanaians to access better opportunities. This principle has underpinned all our programs. Therefore, in implementing the over 15 flagship programs that the President promised, we set out to bring hope, restore confidence in the state, and demonstrate care for the people of Ghana. We sought to restore the self-esteem and dignity of Ghanaians and reduce the grinding poverty that was becoming commonplace. We therefore set out to invest significant resources in the lives of the Ghanaian people by increasing expenditures in education, agriculture, industry, and all of our human capital. Mr. Speaker, in acknowledging that education is the primary driver for upward social and economic mobility, we rolled out a raft of policy measures to improve the opportunities of our people. We invested $3.2 billion to implement free SHS, resulting in over 1.2 million teenagers being in secondary school now, looking forward to better opportunities in life, the Akufo-Addo graduates. For their parents and families, this has translated into $2.2 billion in savings. That is money that the state has put back into the pockets of Ghanaians all across the country, and investments for the state for their future. We have also invested in excess of $1.6 billion in 100,000 jobless but educated young adults who had been ignored by the state and were in despair. Through the new NAPCO initiative, they have been engaged in various state and private institutions, with some of them securing permanent jobs in the process. That is money in the pockets of our youth. Mr. Speaker, from the onset, this government had determined that Ghana will be self-sufficient in food production through our Planting for Food and Jobs program, and would add value to what we produce as well. Create jobs along the value chain under the 1D1F program, which has currently over 70 factories in production, with many more under various stages of construction. So far, we've invested over 1.85 billion in our agriculture sector, resulting in agriculture growth which averaged about 2% between 2014 and 2016 to an average of 5.2% over the past 3 years. That is putting food in abundance on the table of Ghanaians, reducing the cost of living, and putting money in the pocket of over 1.2 million farmers nationwide. We have, Mr. Speaker, relegated Dumsor to the past. It is clear to our fellow Ghanaians by now that we have enjoyed 3.5 years of reliable and cheaper power. We have spent in excess of 4.7 billion on capacity payments, not only to ensure that we keep the lights on, but also to pay for power we do not use under very questionable contractual obligations we inherited. Mr. Speaker, to modernize the economy and improve its global competitiveness, we embarked on a transformative agenda to digitalize the economy. We implemented the digital addressing system and the national ID programs to ensure that each Ghanaian and their dwellings, as well as business locations, will be uniquely identified. All these efforts are being made to formalize the economy, improve the way services were delivered to our people, and increase productivity. That is digitizing the lives of Ghanaians. Now more than ever, the possibilities of the digital economy has been brought to the fore. Mr. Speaker, to protect the public purse and advance good economic governance, we set out to fully implement the provisions of the PFM Act 2016, Act 921, including passage of the PFM Regulations 2019, LI 2378, to further strengthen cash management, budget execution, and budget monitoring. Consequently, we have, for the first time in the history of our budget management, consistently, Mr. Speaker, published budget implementation reports, midterm debt strategies, issuance calendars, as well as annual debt reports. Mr. Speaker, never in the history of our public financial management have we seen this degree of openness, transparency, and accountability in the management of our public finance. This has enabled citizens to hold this government more accountable than any other in our history. Mr. Speaker, while accomplishing all this, we also set out to complete the outstanding policy measures under the derailed IMF program which we inherited. This culminated in our exit from the IMF Extended Credit Facility in March 2019, much to the surprise of our friends across the aisle. Mr. Speaker, the previous government had the penchant of awarding contracts by heart, even when they had no ideas how to pay for them. So to protect the public purse, my ministry initiated and requested the Auditor General to audit and validate over 11 billion CDs of outstanding claims which had been approved and left by the previous government to be paid. The Auditor General validated 6 billion of the 11 billion claims. We await the subsequent surcharging of all those complicit in the submission of the disallowed claims from the Auditor General's department. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to inform this Honorable House that we've paid almost 5 billion of the unpaid bills which we inherited and are managing the public service in a much more responsible manner now. Mr. Speaker, this government under President Akufo-Addo, with these actions, has amply demonstrated its commitment to prudent financial management, investing broadly and inclusively in the nation's development, ensuring value for money, and being held accountable for our actions. Mr. Speaker, we've also put in place key structural measures to sustain our path towards fiscal consolidation, growth, and ensure irreversibility. These include the passage of the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2018, Act 982, forging social partnerships with organized labor and employers to enhance the quality of dialogue and implementation. We've also established and operationalized the Fiscal and Financial Stability Councils to enhance the monitoring of government's fiscal and financial policies. Mr. Speaker, Furthermore, we have initiated a collaboration with faith-based organizations to promote the material, moral, and spiritual growth of our country. This is in recognition of the important role that faith-based organizations have played and continue to play in the peace, security, and development of our dear nation. Right Honorable Speaker, when I presented the President 2020 budget, all the indicators of the economic performance pointed towards a path of sustained consolidation and robust, broad-based growth. The evidence of our superior economic management was clear for all to see. Honorable members of this Parliament approved for government to spend 98,036,692,358 Ghana cedis in the 2020 fiscal year to further the agenda for consolidating the gains to spur growth, jobs, and prosperity for all. Mr. Speaker, a lot has happened since then. While executing the transformation interventions to improve lives and encouraged by the resounding endorsement of the 2020 Eurobond issuance in February, which was oversubscribed by 350%, the novel coronavirus COVID-19 struck swiftly and unexpectedly. In a matter of weeks, Mr. Speaker, what began as a distant outbreak in another part of the world completely overturned our sense of normalcy. The world, for a period, Mr. Speaker, stood still, and the virus uncontrollably disrupting all aspects of our life. The pandemic spread with alarming speed, infecting millions of people around the world and bringing global economic activities to a virtual halt. Its impact has been devastating on the people, businesses, and the economy of the world, with 2.2 billion jobs, 68% of global workforce under threat. Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 pandemic is far more than a health crisis. Ghana has not been spared the painful economic and social impact that COVID-19 has visited on peoples in nations big and small all over the world. The restrictions on movements has disrupted households and businesses with consequent job losses and reduced incomes in Ghana. The hotel and hospitality industry, trade and industry, agriculture, health, creative arts and media, transportation, manufacturing, education, our faith-based organizations, financial services, young entrepreneurs have all been severely affected. Mr. Speaker, not to mention the extensive informal market that is a lot of us Ghanaians. Mr. Speaker, a month into the COVID-19 pandemic in April, IMF revised its projections to indicate that 170 countries, that is 87% of world economies, will see per capita income shrink in 2020. The latest forecast from the fund in June predicts a decline of almost 5% in 2020 for the world economy. Mr. Speaker, world trade is also expected to contract by 11.9%, primarily due to the sudden imposition of tight restrictions on movement. This has led to disruptions in the global supply chain, widespread supply shortages, and its attendant increase in prices and reduction in domestic revenues. Sub-Saharan Africa is now projected to contract by 3.2%, 1.6 percentage points worse than the April forecast. Mr. Speaker, the virus has laid bare our vulnerabilities as a world, as nations, as households, and as individuals. As at yesterday, Wednesday, 22nd July 2020, 622,725 persons had sadly succumbed to this virus, and 15,240,290 had been infected across the world. Mr. Speaker, even before we fully grasp the impact of the COVID-19 outbreak, our immediate concerns were on protecting lives and preserving livelihoods of our people. The President moved swiftly with a 100 million preparedness plan, which was prescient and laid the foundation to implement measures to save lives and safeguard economic activities by improving citizens' access to essential public services and helping businesses weather the downturn. Mr. Speaker, thus far, the health consequences of the COVID-19 outbreak in Ghana has not been as devastating as in other countries. Sadly, as of yesterday, 22nd July 2020, 153 Ghanaians had succumbed to the virus. May their souls, Mr. Speaker, rest in peace. We have since March recorded 29,672 cases with 26,090 recoveries, which puts the number of active cases at 3,429. This has largely been due to the fact that government has shown a leadership of conviction that has been decisive, swift, innovative, compassionate in the management of the crisis, and also because our health professionals nationwide have been heroic in handling the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, the pandemic has also brought to the fore the structural gaps in our health delivery system. That is why, with urgency, we have already begun to mount an effective, coordinated, and sustainable long-term response to the health needs of the people. Under the Agenda 111, previously Agenda 88 initiative of His Excellency the President for hospitals, we will design, build, equip, and staff new hospitals in every district without one, and a new regional hospital in every region with none. This demonstrates government's commitment to protect the lives of Ghanaians. The President has declared that all the district hospitals will be designed and built by Ghanaians, built companies, and will lay the foundation for the launch of the nationwide housing program, God willing, in his second term. Mr. Speaker, these will all be designed by Ghanaians and built by Ghanaian companies. And these construction companies will then have the solid foundation for the launch of also a nationwide housing program, God willing, in the President's second term. Mr. Speaker, we must not and will not be daunted by this extraordinary crisis. Government will continue to do what it has to do to protect lives and support livelihoods through compassionate, competent, and courageous leadership. We have accepted that this pandemic and its effects are unparalleled in the annals of our country and indeed globally. We have accepted that until a vaccine is found, we have no choice but to rearrange our lifestyle in order to protect lives and promote livelihoods. It requires a marshalling of unprecedented resources to contend with the pandemic and its effects on Ghanaians. And Mr. Speaker, this government is up to this task. Mr. Speaker, the predicted long-lasting effect of this pandemic amidst systemic shifts and uncertainties suggests 2020 and beyond will be very challenging. Ghana will therefore need a continuity of courageous, compassionate, and competent government with a well-crafted Ghana will therefore need the continuity of courageous, compassionate, and competent government with a well-crafted program to protect the lives of Ghanaians, safeguard jobs, and support businesses to sustain operations during this period, and especially in the 4 years ahead. This can only be possible with competent economic management of the economy, and we being at the helm. Mr. Speaker, we have proven over and over again that we are better managers of the economy. Together, we took Ghana out of HIPIC and placed it amongst lower middle-income countries within a decade. Together, we recovered and revitalized a critically weakened economy, and today, we can now attract renowned global automobile companies in just 3 years of returning into office. Together, once again, we will optimize the opportunities presented by this pandemic and build a sustainable future for Ghanaians. In the now famous words of President Akufo-Addo, we know how to bring the economy back to life. Therefore, this 2020 Media Fiscal Policy Review and Supplementary Estimate is the first of our economic plans to reposition Ghana and Ghanaians to deal with the challenges posed by the pandemic and seize the opportunities it brings. Our response to this pandemic prioritizes the protection of our lives and livelihoods, sustains our business operations, and sharpens our focus on Ghana's future beyond aid. Mr. Speaker, I'm presenting updates and progress in implementing the 2020 budget and highlighting the significant impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. I also outlined today the resolute steps being taken to get our economy back on track. In his May address to the nation, the President charged the Minister of Finance to design Ghana's recovery program. Mr. Speaker, we wish to take this opportunity to announce to the people of Ghana that the President and his team have done a lot of thinking since March. We have brainstormed over the crisis with a view of using the challenges it presents rather as an opportunity to transform Ghana and for all Ghanaians. I'm happy to announce that in the coming weeks, the President will launch 100 billion, Mr. Speaker, Ghana Cedis Development Program, an ambitious and unprecedented 3.5-year program called Ghana Coronavirus Alleviation Revitalization of Enterprises Support Program. The Ghana Cares Program, Mr. Speaker, or Bantampa Program, which will anchor the comprehensive transformation of our society. Mr. Speaker, I also request supplementary funding to support our priorities of saving lives and livelihoods, supporting businesses to ensure that the health of Ghanaians and their jobs are secure in these challenging times. Mr. Speaker, I now proceed to give details of updated performance for 2019, developments for the first half of 2020, and will conclude with the outlook for the rest of the year and present the supplementary estimates. Mr. Speaker, the global economy has, in the past century, experienced some negative shocks which were deemed unprecedented at the time of their occurrence. Indeed, the Spanish flu of 1918, the Great Depression of the 1930s, and the more recent global financial crisis of 2007 and 2008 adversely impacted the world economy. However, as events unfold, it is becoming increasingly evident that the COVID-19 pandemic and its crippling economic effects has an assured place in economic history, as perhaps the singular event that decimated the global economy in ways never imagined. It is a crisis that has tested global and national leadership like none other in the history of the world during peacetime. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic continues to have dire consequences on Africa. According to estimates of the World Bank, economic growth in sub-Saharan Africa is expected to decline from its 2019 value of 2.4% to between negative 2.1% and negative 5.1% in 2020, making 2020 the worst year since records began in 1970 for the continent's economic growth. According to the IMF's Regional Economic Outlook for Africa, COVID-19, an unprecedented threat to development, April 2020. Let us be in no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that Africa is facing its first recession in 25 years, sadly after 2 decades of continual economic progress. A recession which threatens to exact probably the heaviest human toll in peacetime in Africa. It is our responsibility as leaders, as the people's elected government, to work out and execute an intelligent, ambitious, and all-inclusive recovery plan than none other that will steer this nation and her people out of the recession before us. That, Mr. Speaker, is a daunting task facing us in Ghana today. Mr. Speaker, the pandemic has also affected Africa's long-term structural response to its economic woes, creating the largest trade bloc at 1.2 billion people for a 3.2 trillion economy. Currently, Mr. Speaker, intra-Africa trade is only 15%. The operations of the African Continental Free Trade Area was scheduled to launch on 1st July 2020, right here in Accra. It has now been postponed till January 2021. Mr. Speaker, at the time I presented the 2020 budget to this August House in November last year, the projected end-year economic performance of 2019 was based on available data for the first 3 quarters. Given that we now have the full complement of data, I will now provide an update of the performance of the economy in 2019 to the House. Mr. Speaker, overall real GDP growth rate was 6.5% as against a target of 7%, reflecting an improvement on the 6.3% in 2018. Non-oil real GDP growth rate was 5.8% as against a projection of 5.9%. End period December inflation remained 7.9%, with the target being 8%. Overall budget balance, which was projected to end in a deficit equivalent to 4.5% of GDP, reached 4.8%. Primary balance reached 0.8% as against a projected surplus equivalent to 1.1% of GDP, and accumulated gross international reserves exceeded projected 3.5 months of cover for imports of goods and services to reach 4 months. Mr. Speaker, provisional data released by the Ghana Statistical Service in April 2020 showed that overall real GDP growth for 2019 was 6.5% compared with 6.3% in 2018. This confirms that the economy has continued with its robust performance since 2017, when GDP grew sharply by 8.1%, up from 3.4% in 2016. Non-oil real GDP growth in 2019 was 5.8%, down from 6.5% in 2018. Key drivers of this performance include information communication technology, which recorded the highest subsector growth rate of 46.5%, followed by real estate with growth rates of 19.9%. Mr. Speaker, headline inflation ended the year at 7.9% in December 2019, down from 9.4% in December 2018. In August 2019, the Ghana Statistical Service completed the rebasing of the Consumer Price Index using updated information from the Ghana Living Standard Survey of 2017. Headline inflation following the rebasing was estimated at 7.8% for August 2019, moving inflation well within the lower band of the medium-term inflation target band of 8 plus or minus 2%. Inflation subsequently increased to 8.2% in November due to the upward adjustment in some administrative prices, but eased down to 7.9% at end December 2019, supported by lower food prices. Monetary aggregates and credit. Mr. Speaker, broad money supply, M2 plus, recorded an annual growth of 21.7% in December 2019 compared with 15.4% in 2018, reflecting the return of confidence following the banking sector cleanup exercise. The private sector accounted for 85.1% of the total outstanding credit of $52.2 billion in 2019, representing a growth of 18.3% compared to 10.6% in 2018. In real terms, credit to the private sector grew by 9.7% compared to 1.1% in 2018. Credit distribution was broad-based, with almost all the key economic sectors recording higher growth in 2019 relative to 2018. The main beneficiaries were services 24.1%, commerce and finance 20.9%, and manufacturing 10.9%. Interest rates. Mr. Speaker, the monetary policy rate came down by 100 basis points in 2019 as inflation declined and inflation expectations eased. As a result, the average lending rates declined marginally to 23.6% in December 2019 from 23.9% in December 2018. The 91-day Treasury bill rate, however, inched up marginally to 14.7% in December 2019 from 14.6% in 2018. Interest rates on the 182-day instrument also moved up to 5.2% from 5.0% over the same period. Rates on the secondary bond market also remained broadly stable. Balance of payments. Mr. Speaker, external sector performance remained relatively strong in 2019, supported by a larger trade surplus, a modest current account deficit, and improvements in the capital and financial account net inflows, mainly due to the Eurobond issuance and an increase in FDI. The current account deficit narrowed further to 1.86 billion, 2.8% of GDP in 2019, from 2.04 billion, 3.1% of GDP in 2018, supported by improvements in the trade surplus from 1.81 billion, 2.8% of GDP in 2018, to a surplus of 2.26 billion, 3.4% of GDP at the end of December 2019. These developments resulted in a overall balance of payments surplus of 1.34% in 2019 compared to a deficit of 0.67 billion in 2018. International reserves. Mr. Speaker, following the developments in the external sector, the gross international reserve climbed by 20% to 8.4 billion at the end of 2019 from a stock position of 7 billion at the end of December 2018. This was equivalent, Mr. Speaker, to 4 months of import cover recorded at the end of December 2019 compared to 3.6 months of imports cover as of December 2018. Mr. Speaker, in the year to December 2019, the Ghana cedi cumulatively depreciated by 12.9% against the US dollar compared with 8.4% in 2018. Against the British pound and euro, the Ghana cedi cumulatively depreciated by 15.7% and 11.2% respectively, compared with 3.3% and 3.9% in 2018. Mr. Speaker, government's fiscal operations in 2019 were broadly in line with expectations. The fiscal deficit, excluding financial sector bailout costs, amounted to 4.8% of GDP in 2019, 0.9 percentage points above the recorded deficits of 3.9% of GDP in 2018. The corresponding primary balance for the period was 0.8% against a program revised target of 1.1%, reflecting 3 consecutive years of recording primary surplus. Mr. Speaker, total revenue and grants for the period amounted to 53.4 billion, equivalent to 15.3% of GDP, against the annual program target of 58.9 billion, or 17% of GDP. The 2019 performance also represents 12.1% year-on-year growth. The shortfall in total revenue and grants emanated from both non-oil tax and non-tax revenue. Expenditures. Mr. Speaker, on the expenditure front, total expenditure including arrears clearance for the period was broadly contained within the budget and amounted to 70.3 billion, or 20.1% of GDP, against a target of 74.6 billion, or 21.6% of GDP. Expenditures generally were 5.8% lower than the budgetary appropriation for the year. Mr. Speaker, given the developments in revenue and expenditure, the overall budget balance registered a deficit of 16.9 billion, or 4.8% of GDP, which was financed from both domestic and external sources. The total domestic financing amounted to 11.9 billion, equivalent to 3.4% of GDP, and constituted 70.2% of the total financing. Foreign financing amounted to 5.04 billion, equivalent to 1.4% of GDP, against a target of 8.2 billion, or 2.4% of GDP. Public debt development. Mr. Speaker, our public debt management program for the 2019 financial year was successfully executed despite challenges from the global and the domestic economy. As at end December 2019, the total gross public stock stood at $217.9 billion, $39.3 billion. Of this amount, external debt amounted to $112.5 billion Ghana cedis, or 20.3 billion US dollars, while domestic debt amounted to 105 billion cedis, or 19 billion US dollars. The debt to GDP ratio as of December 2019 was 62.4%, up from 57.6% at end December 2018, reflecting the impact of the financial sector bailout costs and the energy sector payments. Mr. Speaker, 2019 was a good year. Inflation at 7.9%, growth at 6.5%, deficit at 4.8%, positive primary balance, and an improved reserve cover. Macroeconomic performance from January 2020 to June 2020. Mr. Speaker, with that backdrop, we felt set to have a great 2020. Let me now, however, report on the macroeconomic performance for the first half of 2020. Mr. Speaker, the following macroeconomic targets were set for 2020. Overall real GDP growth rate of 6.8%, non-oil real GDP growth rate of 6.7%, end period inflation rate of 8%, overall fiscal deficit of 4.7%, primary surplus of 0.7% of GDP, and gross international reserves to cover at least 3.5 months of imports of goods and services. Growth. Mr. Speaker, provisional estimates released by the Ghana Statistical Service shows that overall GDP growth was 4.9% in the first quarter 2020 compared to 6.7% over the same period in 2019. Growth in the non-oil sector was 4.9% compared to 6% in the corresponding period of 2019. The agricultural sector recorded a growth of 2.8% in the first quarter of 2020 compared to 2.2% during the same period in 2019. Industry sector recorded a growth of 1.5% in the first quarter of 2020 compared to 8.4% during the same period in 2019 because of massively decreased oil exports. Growth in the services sector was strong at 9.5% in the first quarter of 2020 compared to 7.2% recorded during the same period in 2019. Mr. Speaker, headline inflation remained flat at 7.8% from January until March 2020. Inflation, however, rose to 10.6% in April and further to 11.3% in May, reflecting the panic buying that preceded the market fumigation exercises and across the country and the partial lockdown in the two largest cities of Accra and Kumasi. Inflation has declined marginally to 11.2% in June as pressure on food prices began to decline due to the easing of the restrictions. Mr. Speaker, from the beginning of the year to May 2020, growth in broad money supply has slowed down, increasing by 6% compared to a 7% increase over the corresponding period in 2019. Credit advanced by banks to public and private institutions also decreased for the first 5 months of the year as demand and supply for loans have dropped due mainly to the uncertainties created by COVID-19 pandemic and decline in aggregate demand. Mr. Speaker, the Monetary Policy Committee of Bank of Ghana reduced the monetary policy rate by 150 basis points to 14.5% in March 2020 as part of broad measures to reinvigorate economic activity. The interbank rate declined from 15.2% in December 2019 to 13.8% in June 2020, reflecting the reduction in the MPR in March 2020 and improved liquidity conditions in the banking sector. Similarly, interest rates on the 91-day Treasury instruments declined to 13.97% in June 2020 from 14.69% in December 2019. Average lending rate also decreased to 21.95% from 23.59% over the same comparative period, reflecting improved liquidity conditions in the banking sector and constrained demand for loanable funds. Balance of payments. Mr. Speaker, the current account recorded a surplus of 199.9 billion, 0.3% of GDP in the first quarter of 2020, up by 12.4% from 177.8 billion, 0.3% of GDP during the same period in 2019. The increase in the current account surplus was influenced largely by improvements in the trade balance as well as current transfers. The trade balance recorded a surplus, Mr. Speaker, of $1.0 billion compared to a surplus of $1.2 billion in the corresponding period of 2019, mainly on account of a sharp decline in import growth, which more than outweighed the fall in exports. As a result of developments in the external sector, the overall balance of payments recorded a surplus of $1.5 billion compared to a surplus of $2.997 billion recorded in the first quarter of 2019. Mr. Speaker, the country's gross international reserves stood at $9.2 billion at the end of June 2020, from a stock position of $8.4 billion as at the end of December 2019. This was sufficient to provide 4.3 months of import cover compared to 4 months of import cover as of December 2019. Mr. Speaker, the Ghana cedi started the year strongly, appreciating by 4.5% on a year-to-year basis by end of February 2020 on the back of the US $3 billion sovereign bond issue, strong macroeconomic fundamentals, and BOG's forward auction sales, amongst others. However, the deterioration in financial market risk sentiment due to the spread of COVID-19, as well as the seasonal demand pressures from the energy and corporate sectors, weighed heavily on the cedi. On a year-to-date basis, the cedi depreciated by 2.4% against the dollar and the euro in June 2020, but appreciated by 4.5% against the pound sterling, compared to a depreciation of 8.3%, 7.9%, and 7.6% against the dollar, the euro, and the pound sterling, respectively, over the same period in 2019. Mr. Speaker, this is the lowest depreciation of the currency in any election year, and especially remarkable in these COVID times. We thank God for the foresight in issuing our Eurobond in February of this year. Mr. Speaker, the implementation of the government's fiscal policy for 2020 has been greatly impacted by the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic. Provisional fiscal data for the first half of the year showed that revenue mobilization fell short of target by 26%, resulting mainly from shortfalls in oil revenues, customs receipts, and non-oil, non-tax revenues. Let me, however, congratulate GRA's leadership and tax division for exceeding their tax targets by some 600 million Ghana cedis. Expenditure execution, on the other hand, was faster than programmed due to the emergency spending on the various COVID-19 related programs. Mr. Speaker, these developments pushed our financing requirements above the program limits for the period to enable us to address these emergency expenditure pressures. Consequently, the fiscal deficit for the period widened from a program target of 3.1% of GDP to 6.3% of GDP. The corresponding primary balance for the period was in deficit of 3.3% of GDP compared to a targeted primary deficit of 0% of GDP. Revenue performance. Mr. Speaker, total revenue and grants for January to June 2020 amounted to 22.0 billion Ghana cedis compared with a program target of 29.8 billion Ghana cedis, resulting in a shortfall of 26.0% or a performance rate of 74%. This represents a nominal decline of 6.8% over the corresponding period in 2019. Mr. Speaker, non-oil tax revenue comprising taxes on income and property, goods and services, and international trade amounted to 16.7 billion or 4.3% of GDP, 16.2% below the program target of 19.95 billion or 5.2% of GDP. The lower than program performance in non-oil tax revenue was driven by the underperformance of non-oil tax handles such as domestic VAT, petroleum excise taxes, domestic national health insurance levy, and GET fund levy. However, personal income tax and communication tax, services tax, both outperformed their respective targets for the period. Mr. Speaker, revenue from upstream oil and gas amounted to 1.99 billion, 0.5% of GDP, 55.4%, Mr. Speaker, lower than the program target of 4.5 billion Ghana cedis. This was mainly on account of much lower volumes and significant drop in crude oil prices on the international market, coming as low as $12 at some point. Mr. Speaker, total expenditures, including arrears clearance, for the period amounted to 46.4 billion Ghana cedis, or 12% of GDP, compared with the program target of 41.6 billion, or 10.8% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, with the exception of interest payments and grants to other government units, which were below their respective targets, compensation of employees, goods and services, and capital expenditure were above target due to the additional spending requirements in relation to COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Speaker, the result of government's fiscal operations resulted in a cash basis deficits of 24.3 billion, or 6.3% of GDP, compared with the program target of 11.8 billion, or 3.1% of GDP for January to June 2020. Mr. Speaker, the overall budget balance of finance from both domestic and external sources. Total domestic financing amounted to 21.8 billion, equivalent to 5.7% of GDP, and constituted 89.5% of the total financing. Foreign financing amounted to 2.6 billion Ghana cedis, some 0.7% of GDP, against a target of 15.1 billion, or 3.9% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, the primary balance recorded a deficit equivalent to 3.3% of GDP, higher than the program deficit of 0.01% of GDP, mainly due to lower than program revenues and faster execution of its expenditures. Mr. Speaker, consistent with the front-loading of government fiscal operations, the financing needs of government were also front-loaded. As earlier stated, the COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in the tightening of global financial conditions. Fortunately, our $3 billion international capital market financing was conducted in the first 2 months of the year. In addition, the IMF's US $1 billion rapid credit facility was also executed in April 2020. In a matter of 4 months, Mr. Speaker, through good leadership and international goodwill brought about by efficient management of the economy, this nation was able to raise over 20 billion Ghana cedis to protect the vulnerable, our businesses, and our dignity as a people. Taking into consideration all these developments, the provisional debt stock as at the end of June 2020 stood at 255.7 billion Ghana cedis, 45.5 billion US dollars, representing 66.36% of GDP. The increase was mainly as a result of a Eurobond issuance of $3 billion in February 2020, exchange rate depreciation, front-loading of expenditures, and the COVID-19 effect, which increased the cedi equivalent of the outstanding debt stock. The total debt stock was made up of 134.9 billion, 23.9 billion US dollars, 120.8 billion Ghana cedis, 21.5 billion US dollars of external and domestic debt, accounting for approximately 52.7% and 47.3% of the total public debt stock, respectively. As a percentage of GDP, external and domestic debt represented 35% and 31.36%, respectively. Mr. Speaker, Eurobond issuance. As you may recall, government obtained the approval of this August House in December last year, to raise up to $3 billion to finance growth-oriented expenditures in the 2020 budget, including restructuring the energy sector, and also to conduct liability management operations. Based on the approval, Ghana became the first ever country on the African continent to issue a 41-year bond and a second tri-tranche bond in the history of the country. Ghana successfully raised $3 billion in international capital markets in 3 tranches of 6-year, 14-year, and 41-year Eurobonds of $1.25 billion, $1 billion, and $750 million, respectively, on February 2020. The 6-year, 14-year, and 41-year bonds, Mr. Speaker, were priced at 6.375%, 7.875%, and 8.75%, respectively. Mr. Speaker, this transaction was a landmark achievement in many respects, as the bond came with the lowest ever coupon rate for Ghana and the first 41-year bond tenor in Africa. In fact, despite the initial concerns over the COVID-19 pandemic and its potential adverse impact on market conditions on emerging markets, the order book was 5 times oversubscribed. This translated into a peak order book in excess of $15 billion and came on the heels of the 7 times oversubscription for the 2019 Eurobond issuance. Mr. Speaker, in line with the use of proceeds approved by Parliament, an amount of $2 billion was earmarked to finance growth-oriented expenditures, $1 billion for restructuring the energy sector in the 2020 budget, and the remaining $1 billion for liability management operations. Already, Mr. Speaker, a buyback of $523 million of the maturing 2023 Eurobond has been carried out. The financial sector cleanup and bailout. Mr. Speaker, as stated earlier, the outbreak of the pandemic is having a negative impact on the financial sector here in Ghana and across the world. All over the world, central banks are being relied upon by governments to find the liquidity to tackle the socioeconomic difficulties unleashed by the pandemic. The Bank of Ghana has stepped up to the challenge and announced various policy measures to help support the economy and financial institutions in order to cushion the adverse impact of COVID-19 on the economy. It is important to stress that this has been possible. It is important to stress, Mr. Speaker, that this has been possible because of the responsible and competent management of both the fiscal and monetary space since 2017. As a result of mismanagement, Mr. Speaker, depositors' funds had been locked up with no hope that these depositors could access their own funds. The authorities, with foresight and appreciation of the role of the banking financial sector to any economy, especially to oil the engine of the private sector, introduced painful but unavoidable reforms to clean up the mess inherited from the previous government. The timely intervention under this administration resulted in the saving of these locked up funds in failed banks. This was a sovereign but necessary action that in total is costing the state, Mr. Speaker, in excess of $21 billion of taxpayers' money. These are funds that could have been otherwise deployed to support the development agenda of the government. Let it be said that a serious government as we are, desperate as we were to face a broken economy as it was, and fund our own programs as promised, and as patriotic as we are, had absolutely no thoughts, no time, no energy, or the luxury to conspire with the central bank to deliberately cause the downfall of Ghanaian banks that were already in zombie state, fatally insolvent by the time we took office. What we did was to merge those that had failed, save those that could be saved, with the view of building a strong and viable financial sector with integrity. What the President did, Mr. Speaker, which is unusual in banking practice globally, was to go the extra mile to save the funds of all depositors of failed banks. Let no one stand on a steeple and proclaim untruths, and let mature Ghanaians be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to be angry. James 2:10.
Honourable members, in view of the time and the business before us, sitting is extended beyond the normal hours.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as at the end of the first quarter 2020, a total amount of 13.6 billion, 3.5% of GDP, had been spent on the resolution of failed banks, specialized deposit-taking institutions, microfinance institutions, the establishment of the Consolidated Bank of Ghana Limited, as well as the capitalization of the Ghana Amalgamated Trust. Mr. Speaker, additionally, with the President's directives to fully pay all depositors whose funds were locked up with the failed SDIs and MFIs, an amount of 5 billion was spent. This brings the total expenditure on financial sector interventions as of June 2020 to 18.6 billion, 4.8% of GDP. Government has also committed an amount of 3.1 billion, 0.78% of GDP, towards supporting investors in failed asset management companies regulated by the SEC. Mr. Speaker, this will bring the overall total government expenditure for the failed financial institutions to 21.6 billion. 5.6% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, this is a legacy of financial enslavement from the previous administration. Mr. Speaker, talking about slavery, for all of us who did history for O-levels, remember Professor Dubois' book on slavery, and he described slavery as an unmitigated crime. A legacy of financial enslavement from the previous administration. And that, Mr. Speaker, by Professor Dubois is a crime, Mr. Speaker, unmitigated. A crime, Mr. Speaker, unmitigated by any extenuating circumstance. Mr. Speaker, while fiscal consolidation and stellar macroeconomic performance are critical to robust and sustainable economy, President Akufo-Addo believes that this must reflect first and foremost in improvements in the everyday life of, as we know, my fellow Ghanaians. Consistent with this belief, government for the past 3.5 years have been implementing a number of flagship programming to spearhead a broad-based economic and social transformation and deliver these fundamental services to all Ghanaians. Mr. Speaker, progress has been made in the implementation of these flagship programs, with significant achievements in the implementation of the free senior high school, planting for food and jobs, one district, one factory, infrastructure for poverty eradication program, and Nation Builders Corps, amongst others. Soon to add 111 hospitals. These programs have brought needed reliefs and impacted positively on all the lives of all ordinary citizens. Mr. Speaker, free senior high school has saved parents and guardians a cumulative total amount of 3.2 billion since 2017, and that is money in their pockets and investments in their future. This intervention has sustained the schooling of 1,199,750 students to date, a marked increase from the 813,443 students enrolled in 2016 and 2017. Mr. Speaker, The Kufuor government in 2005-20 and 2006 academic year rolled out the Ghana School Feeding Program to provide at least one meal to school children in deprived communities between 2016 and now. The feeding program, Mr. Speaker, has been extended to reach 2,980,000 pupils in deprived communities, representing, Mr. Speaker, an increase of 78.3% in beneficiaries. In providing equal opportunity for foundational education through school feeding, we have invested 1.3 billion since 2017 as compared to 925 million in the 3 years prior to 2017. Mr. Speaker, compassion for our compatriots has seen us expand LEAP to reach 334,000 households by June 2020, representing an increase of 56.8% in beneficiaries since 2016. Furthermore, government through LEAP has also successfully enrolled 73% of its beneficiaries onto the NHIS for free. We have invested 464 million since 2017 to increase access to services and opportunities among the extremely poor and vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, the restoration of allowances for trainees has brought relief valued at 994 million to 50,825 and 48,000 nurses and teacher trainees, respectively, between 2017 and December 2020. An additional 57 million has been released for 48,200 nurses trainees at the end of June 2020. This is true relief, Mr. Speaker, for students and guardians while advancing our efforts to build a robust health and educational system. Mr. Speaker, to support our youth, 97,373 graduates have been employed in key sectors of the economy under NAPCO program since May 2018. We have subsequently retained them by spending over 1.6 billion, and that is money in their respective pocket, but more importantly, the build-up of dignity and training for future jobs. Mr. Speaker, the government's Planting for Food and Jobs initiative has saved 1.9 million Ghanaian farmers in excess of Ghana cedis 1.8 billion over the last 3.5 years through subsidized fertilizers and other inputs. This is money in their pockets. The increased usage of improved seeds and fertilizer by farmers has led to improved productivity of selected food crops. Mr. Speaker, a major outcome of our intervention in the agricultural sector has been the dramatic improvement in food security, leading to increased exports of food items to neighboring countries from 85,000 metric tons to 133,145 metric tons between 2017 and 2019. Towards enhancing the export potential of the country, approximately 15 million seedlings of cashew, coffee, coconut, and oil palm have been distributed to farmers. This Parliament has already passed a tree crop development bill to properly regulate the development of these crops. Mr. Speaker, government's agenda for industrial development for job creation and economic transformation rests on the partnership with the private sector to operationalize the One District, One Factory initiative. Our push on this front has resulted in over 70 operational factories with 232 projects at various stages of implementation. Not only have we leveraged private sector support through tax exemptions valued at 33 million Ghana cedis, government has directly spent 210 million as support to existing factories and for the construction of new factories. Our industrial agenda has certainly enhanced the prospects for more jobs for Ghanaians. We have also eased the credit constraints faced by 97,876 small and micro enterprises, mostly in the informal sector, under MASLOC, with an amount of 99 million Ghana cedis between 2017 and 2010. This intervention continues to help these enterprises to thrive and sustain the employment of fellow Ghanaians, especially women. Mr. Speaker, His Excellency the President has been an ardent advocate of youth entrepreneurship. Through the Presidential Business Support Program, about 19 startups have been trained and mentored to create about 90,000 direct and indirect jobs. A total amount of 88.3 million has been expended to make this possible. Infrastructure development. As a government, Mr. Speaker, we have been preoccupied with providing connective infrastructure to spur socio-economic development. This has remained a high priority as it is a bedrock for the agenda to make our country the regional hub for trade, manufacturing, and logistics. Mr. Speaker, in offering a major boost to the road sector, we declared 2020 as the year of roads. Despite the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, substantial progress has been made. Major road infrastructure undertaken by the government includes Tema Motorway Roundabout, a 3-tier interchange, which is completed and commissioned, Pokwasi Interchange, under the Accra Urban Transport Project. This involves the construction, Mr. Speaker, of a 4-tier interchange. Progress currently stands at 74%. Obecha Lantern Circle Interchange and ancillary works currently at 45% completion. Tamale Interchange Project, which is 40% complete. Kumasi Lake Roads and Drainage Extension Project are 55% completion at the end of June 2020. Mr. Speaker, residents of all urban centers, especially Accra, Ho, Kumasi, and Takoradi, are seeing continual improvements in inner city roads in their metropolis. In addition, construction of critical interregional road projects and bridges, including the Eastern Corridor Road Phase 1, are all at various stages of completion. Road contractors have seen increased payment of claims by this government. We have paid road contractors approximately 6.4 billion from 2017 to date. That substantially helps them to meet their obligations and sustain their operations. Mr. Speaker, we set out to modernize the railway system and effectively replace the colonial rail layout. Mr. Speaker, since 2017, we have committed 566 million to cover works on construction and rehabilitation of railway lines, including rehabilitation of Accra to Tema, 30 kilometers, Achimota to Nsawam, 33 kilometers, Kojo Krom to Takwa, 56 kilometers. The Tema to Pakadan Railway has seen approximately 56 kilometers out of the 97 kilometers of track laying works. The construction of the new standard gauge Western Line, Takoradi to Kumasi, or the Kojo Krom to Mansu section is also on course. Mr. Speaker, as the rail minister would say, the fundamentals are strong. Mr. Speaker, to activate these networks, a contract for the purchase of 35 trains has also been signed. A set of 9 trains will be delivered within 18 months. Mr. Speaker, sustainable delivery of basic infrastructure to improve lives in rural and peri-urban communities has engaged our attention. The implementation of the Infrastructure for Poverty Eradication Program initiative is premised on this interest. Mr. Speaker, under the IPEP program, the infrastructure deficit in these communities have been significantly closed. A number of infrastructure initiatives, including prefabricated warehouses, one village, one dam, one constituency, one ambulance, mechanized boreholes have been implemented in all 275 constituencies. Our commitment to Ghanaians in these areas have meant that we have invested 524 million from 2017 to date. Mr. Speaker, we commenced the construction of 10 fish landing sites Ateshi, Axim, Disco, Elmina, Winneba, Mountford, Senyabreku, Fetegoma, Mori, and Keta to improve safety and enhance the quality of life in fishing communities. We've improved access roads and refrigeration, market linkages will be strengthened, and losses will be minimized. 8 of the fish landing sites are already at various stages of completion. Mr. Speaker, government has also invested about 904 million in the provision of sanitation facilities and potable water, mostly to deprived communities. These have supported the fitting of hand pumps to deliver water to about 220,000 households. In addition, a total of 7,240-liter waste bins have been deployed in selected MMDAs within the Accra, the Greater Accra, Ashanti, Western Central, OT, and Eastern regions, as well as state institutions to aid in the proper disposal of waste. Mr. Speaker, the sense of deprivation and exclusion experienced by residents in inner city and Zongo communities has been of concern to President Akufo-Addo. Not only have we established the Ministry of Inner City and Zongo Development to drive improvements in these communities, we have funded earmark projects by resourcing the Zongo Development Fund instituted by this government. We have committed 87 million to ZDF to support the delivery of key projects in education and skills training, health and sanitation, sports and leisure, local businesses and centers of culture, as well as improved security. With these investments, the inequality gap is being bridged to enhance social mobility. In response to government's introduction of a new comprehensive automotive manufacturing development policy, some of the leading global automobile industries, referred to as original equipment manufacturers, have already established commercial interests in Ghana to assemble their brand of vehicles. In March 2020, the Volkswagen Group rolled out the first VW locally assembled vehicle. VW Ghana is currently producing 6 different brands of vehicles, namely the Tiguan, the Terramon, the Amarok, Passat, Polo, and Caddy. Both the Toyota and Nissan groups are also positioned to establish assembly operations before the end of the year. Sinotruk, a leading global manufacturer of heavy-duty trucks, is also assembling a variety of trucks in Ghana through Zonda Tech Ghana Limited. An indigenous Ghanaian company, Mr. Speaker, the Kantanka Group, of which I drive one, has also been formally granted a license to continue their auto assembly operations in Ghana and to benefit from incentives under the Ghana Automotive Manufacturing Policy. Mr. Speaker, I can vouch for the integrity of the vehicle and will encourage my friends across the aisle to invest in that company. In order to support these new major developments, government will establish an automobile industry development center, which will, among other things, coordinate the technical processes for licensing vehicle assemblers and manufacturers and monitor their compliance with industries, regulations, and standards. The center will also coordinate the implementation of a vehicle financing scheme, which will link financial institutions to individuals and groups interested in purchasing newly assembled vehicles in Ghana. Furthermore, it will manage an automobile skills and technology upgrading program to provide requisite skills for the industry. It is envisaged that the development of the automobile industry in Ghana, which is one of the new strategic anchor initiatives being promoted under the Ministry of Trade and Industry's Industrial Transformation Agenda, will constitute a significant step, Mr. Speaker, towards import substitution and enhancing exports, particularly within the context of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Ghana is well positioned, Mr. Speaker, to become the new automobile manufacturing hub in Africa. Mr. Speaker, the continued and successful implementation of these interventions is delivering real relief to our people. Effectively, we are gradually building a stronger foundation for a more inclusive transformation of our country. Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 impact and mitigating measures. With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I will now proceed to present the impact of COVID-19 and the mitigating measures adopted by government. Mr. Speaker, 2020 has been a very challenging year for the global economy, primarily as a result of the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic, Mr. Speaker, has disrupted global economic activity, created uncertainty, and weakened global growth conditions. Growth for 2020, which was projected at 3.4%, is now expected to contract by 4.9% in 2020. Advanced countries are expected to contract by 8%. Emerging markets, developing economies projected to contract by 3 percentage points, while Sub-Saharan Africa is expected to contract by 3.2%. Mr. Speaker, Germany's leader, the bastion of fiscal prudence, Chancellor Merkel, stated that don't talk to me about budget deficits in this era. The IMF projects in its June 2020 World Economic Outlook that the global overall fiscal balance will worsen from a deficit of 3.9% of GDP in 2019 to a deficit of 13.9% in 2020, whilst global debt to GDP ratios will worsen from 82.8% of GDP in 2019 to 101.5% of GDP in 2020. Likewise, Mr. Speaker, global trade is expected to contract by 11.9% in 2020, with that of emerging market and developing economies declining by 9.4% of GDP. Many governments have cut interest rates and provided fiscal stimulus to businesses and industry, as well as social safety nets to their citizens. Governments have rolled out billions, sometimes trillions of dollars to boost their economies, hoping to dampen the economic damage brought on by the pandemic. Massive economic support have been pledged, from direct payments to individuals to limitless loans for distressed businesses. It is estimated that the G20 countries are providing over 11 trillion in fiscal support, about 3.5 trillion of which will support direct government spending. Multilateral institutions, particularly the IMF and the World Bank, have also announced specific support packages for member countries. The IMF has, within the last 4 months, approved an amount of $10 billion for African countries, compared to $1 billion each year in the past 3 years. Mr. Speaker, these global developments and projections have significant implications for the socio-economic life here in Ghana. Mr. Speaker, government was swift and proactive in its response to the pandemic. With the commendable support of this august House, the Imposition of Restrictions Act 2020, Act 1012, was enacted to enforce social and physical distancing protocols. Under Act 1012, Mr. Speaker, government imposed restrictions on movement of persons in the Greater Accra Metropolitan Area and Kumasi Metropolitan Area and contiguous districts for a period of 3 weeks. Mr. Speaker, just as the Ghanaian economy was beginning to consolidate its recent gains for growth and jobs, the COVID-19 outbreak hit the country, leading to the initial severe movement of restrictions. Although the restrictions are gradually being eased, the pandemic continues to pose significant challenges to the Ghanaian economy. The sectors heavily affected include the hotel and hospitality industry, foreign direct investment, trade and industry, agriculture, health, transportation, manufacturing, the religious services, education. Households and businesses have equally been hard hit, with significant job losses and reduced incomes. Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 has led to disruptions in corporate and general business confidence, with threats to projected revenues, profitability, liquidity growth. So far, 19 of the 28 state-owned enterprises are projecting losses up to $1.6 billion for 2020. Mr. Speaker, restrictions on movement and enforcement of social distancing protocols severely affected the transport sector. Commuter minibus services, trotros, operated at 70% load capacity, whilst inner-city buses had passengers reduced by 50% between March and May. The operations of Metro Mass Transport experienced a decline in monthly revenues from 5.5 million to 2.1 million cedis. The Intercity STT company witnessed a decline in bus services and luggage revenue from average of 5 million in previous months to average of 3 million cedis since March 2020. The Driver and Vehicle Licensing Authority also experienced losses as revenues fell drastically from 3.5 million to about 1 million between March and April 2020. Evidence presented by the tour operators shows 11,558 tourists canceled their visits to Ghana, leading to a projected year-to-date revenue loss of 4.8 million Ghana cedis. Mr. Speaker, in the energy sector, the significant impact on exploration, appraisal, and production of oil and gas activities, including delays in implementing the 2020 work programs of operators. The Petroleum Commission has estimated that projects valued at $324 million across the petroleum upstream subsector have stalled or been postponed due to the pandemic. Alka Energy, for instance, has notified the Ministry of Energy of the postponement of the Peckham field development. This has impacted the delivery of first oil from the Peckham project, thereby postponing projected revenues to government. These postponements could weaken the critical role of the oil and gas sector in propelling economic growth. Mr. Speaker, to authenticate initial indications, the Ministry of Employment and Labor Relations is currently leading a comprehensive study on job losses, as well as the impact of COVID-19 on employment and related matters in Ghana. This August House will accordingly be apprised in due course. Consequently, Mr. Speaker, the projected real GDP growth for 2020 has been revised considerably downwards from 6.8% to 0.9%. Mr. Speaker, it is only a solid foundation established by this government and the resilient buffers built by the Bank of Ghana that has saved the economy from contracting, as has happened in many countries. Mr. Speaker, the fiscal cost of COVID-19 pandemic is enormous. When I appeared before this August House in March this year, I informed honorable members that the total fiscal impact of the pandemic was estimated about 9.5 billion, 2.5% revised GDP, stemming from shortfalls in petroleum receipts, import duties, and other tax revenues, the cost of the Emergency Preparedness Response Plan, and the cost of the Coronavirus Alleviation Program. Mr. Speaker, updated fiscal estimates indicate that revenues are expected to fall short of the 2020 budget target by 13.6 billion cedis, 3.5% of revised GDP, arising from shortfalls in petroleum receipts of 5.3 billion Ghana cedis, non-oil tax revenue of 5.1 billion Ghana cedis, and non-tax revenues of 3.3 billion Ghana cedis. Mr. Speaker, expenditures, on the other hand, are expected to increase by 13.1 billion Ghana cedis, 3.4% of our GDP, reflecting mainly expenditures on COVID-19 preparedness and response plan, provision of health infrastructure, Coronavirus Alleviation Program, capitalization of National Development Bank, security, elections, and payment of outstanding claims. Mr. Speaker, at the end of the year, government did not anticipate the need to provide over 300,000 COVID-19 test kits, extra allowance to frontline health workers, income tax exemptions for all health sector workers, hire over 1,000 contact tracers, supply households with free water, free electricity for over 50% of the population, and provide $600 million to support small and medium-scale enterprises under the coronavirus alleviation program. Mr. Speaker, all these costs to government come at a time of reduced revenue at our ports, falling global oil prices, near collapse of the hospitality industry, and a general decline in global trade. Such unexpected expenditure often leads to increased budget deficit. However, it should be noted that these are not ordinary times, and as such, we require extraordinary economic and financial interventions. Mr. Speaker, the interventions implemented by countries the world over have been massively expensive but necessary to sustain their economies amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. It is worthy of note that most of these interventions by various countries were not budgeted for at the beginning of the fiscal year. And these countries, like Ghana, could experience budget deficits not because of profligate spending or mismanagement of their economies, but the inescapable exigencies of these times. Indeed, our donor partners are amazed at how we have spent so little and yet achieved such impressive results compared to the colossal resources their governments have released to support their economies. Mr. Speaker, government proactively put together the $560 million National Emergency Preparedness Response Plan for COVID-19 to help manage and contain the spread of the virus and strengthen the national capacity for surveillance, diagnosis, and case management. The implementation of the plan was anchored on the 3 T's of testing, tracing, and treatment. Mr. Speaker, in order to enhance our testing efforts, the Noguchi Memorial Institute for Medical Research at Legon at the University of Ghana, the Kumasi Center for Collaborative Research, KCCR, and the National Public Health Reference Laboratory at Kolebu were designated as national testing institutions. The capacity of scientific research and testing teams at the 3 regional designated testing institutions have been significantly expanded to 10 sites over the last 4 to 6 weeks. Mr. Speaker, the supply of such needed logistics was also a first order priority. Accordingly, government provided 3.6 million reusable face masks, 50,000 medical scrubs, 90,000 hospital gowns, and 90,000 headgears to the health facilities from 9th of April to 30th of June 2020, and these were manufactured locally. Mr. Speaker, in motivating health personnel, government has provided a life insurance package worth 10 million Ghana cedis for those directly involved in surveillance, case management, laboratory, and all other health and allied personnel who get infected. Additional provision was made for overtime and risk-based payments for key frontline workers. Transport costs and costs for sustenance for contact tracers, and field surveillance officers were also absorbed by government. Mr. Speaker, to further cushion and incentivize frontline workers, government waived personal income taxes for 137,000 health workers, offered allowance of 50% of basic salary for about 10,000 frontline health workers, and provided them transportation for the duration of the lockdown. These direct reliefs to health workers cost government additional 320 million Ghana cedis. To mitigate the impact of the pandemic on citizens, government needed to help businesses retain their workers and support families in these unprecedented times, with Ghanaians being asked to stay home or work from home if possible and observe hygiene protocols. Government substantially covered the cost of electricity and water services from April to June 2020. To this end, electricity and water consumption was temporarily subsidized. Government fully covered the cost of consumption of the 1 million Lifeline customers and subsidized 50% of the consumption of all other customers. This livelihood preservation program for about 4 million households and 680,000 businesses added an unplanned 1.02 billion to government expenditures. The total cost of the water relief program to government is projected at 275.5 million, out of which 199 million has been paid by end of June 2020. Mr. Speaker, government through the Gender Ministry and NADMO provided 1,827,581 and 917,142 cooked food packages to vulnerable persons within Accra and Kumasi, respectively, during the lockdown. In collaboration with private organizations, government also distributed dry food packages to about 470,000 families. Let me extend my deepest gratitude to the faith-based organizations for this unique partnership with governments, and may the Lord count this as righteousness for the faith-based organizations and the government. Mr. Speaker, the support to households in terms of supply of dry food packs and hot cooked meals cost government 54 million to enable them mitigate the impact of the pandemic. This was in addition to an amount of 50 million transferred to the 400,000 most vulnerable individuals under the LEAP program. Mr. Speaker, in response to the flight of an estimated 3,212 Ghanaians stranded abroad due to the disruptions caused by the pandemic, government has rolled out the Operations Return Home program. As at end June 2020, a total of 2,250 individuals had been evacuated, with government bearing full cost of flight and mandatory 14-day hotel quarantine services for 1,116 persons, most of whom are students. Government has prioritized the easing of restrictions on education by first allowing final year students at the tertiary level to resume schooling on Monday, 15 June 2020. To facilitate this process, a total, Mr. Speaker, of 600,000 face masks were supplied to the tertiary institutions. In addition to this, 1,700 Veronica baskets, 200 buckets, 200,000 liters of alcohol-based sanitizers, 3,400 liters of liquid soap, 900 thermometer guns were also distributed. All the 1,167 senior high schools in the country were fumigated and disinfected. Government also provided 2.4 million pieces of reusable face masks to students, teachers, and non-teaching staff, invigilators, and school administrators, with each person receiving 3 pieces. The economy. Mr. Speaker, recognizing the devastating impact of the pandemic on businesses and in the spirit of the Ghana Beyond Aid vision, government mobilized several local industries to produce and ensure adequate supply of critically needed inputs to fight the pandemic. As part of that program, government procured ultrasound firms. In addition, 15 million face masks, out of which 5 million and 10 million were supplied to frontline health workers and schools respectively at the cost of 65 million Ghana cedis. Mr. Speaker, the CAP Business Support Scheme of 600 million cedis was designed to specifically support micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises and was launched by His Excellency President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo on 19th May 2020. The scheme is part of the 1.2 billion cap approved by Parliament to address the disruptions to economic activities due to the pandemic. To date, more than 64,000 Ghanaians from all the regions have benefited from the scheme. The scheme established the Adom Microsoft loans to micro enterprises, which are being dispersed through the Vodafone mobile money platform. Then the soft loans targeted at small and medium enterprises will be dispersed through participation in financial institutions. Mr. Speaker, through the scheme, tin registration in Ghana increased from approximately 110,000 a month to 815,449 from 9th May 2020 to 30th June 2020, thereby supporting government's agenda to formalize the informal sector. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the interventions, government through the Bank of Ghana responded to the COVID-19 related challenges in the banking sector with a suite of policy measures designed to cushion businesses and the economy at large. We targeted syndicated lending of 3 billion Ghana cedis. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to announce that the banks have reported loan restructurings, moratoria, and new facilities of over 7 billion cedis in the past 4 months. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 National Trust Fund established under Act 1013 in April 2020 had mobilized about 53 million from individuals, churches, corporate bodies, staff of organizations, non-government organizations, groups, and associations, among others, as at the end of June 2020, including, Mr. Speaker, this August House. Out of this, an amount of 32 million have been used for the same period. Mr. Speaker, the scale of this pandemic has deepened the strategic partnership between the state and non-state actors, especially the private sector. Mr. Speaker, the Church of Pentecost, as a humanitarian gesture and in keeping with recent social partnership arrangements, offered the Pentecost Convention Center at Gomoafete as an isolation sector for infected persons. Similarly, the Catholic Church released a host of its facilities located across the country to house and treat infected persons. The 140-bed capacity Ghana Man Soccer Center in Pram Pram, owned by the Ghana Football Association, also served as an isolation center. The work of the traditional churches, charismatics, Pentecostal churches, and our Islamic leaders continue to uphold our people. To help mobilize critical support from the business community and help government respond promptly to the pandemic, the private sector set up the Ghana COVID-19 Private Sector Fund to provide critical interventions to Ghanaians. Mr. Speaker, in a commendable effort towards increasing the country's infectious disease treatment capacity, the private sector fund has undertaken to construct 400-bed facilities, each with a 21-bed intensive care unit, a level 2.5 laboratory and staff block in Accra, Kumasi, Tamale, and Takoradi. The first of these 4, which commenced through a virtual sword cutting by His Excellency the President on 17th April 2020, is expected to be commissioned by end August 2020. This is real partnership at work. Mr. Speaker, at the very height of the pandemic, overnight, planes stopped flying, buses were empty, city centers were deserted, churches were closed, offices empty, and hotels shut down. The experience of this pandemic has come along with real lessons that have implications for Ghana's socio-economic development. Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 has taught us that a lot of the things we did not believe possible are possible. The enticing emergency social support and economic stimulus packages announced by G20 and OECD countries must ignite our passions for our country and re-energize our efforts to create prosperity for all our people. Mr. Speaker, I believe we must not waste this pandemic. It is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to really effect and deliver an enduring transformational change. We are called upon to remove the unspoken limits on our ambitions and critically examine all the boundaries we imposed on ourselves. Mr. Speaker, we must have courage and be audacious in repositioning Ghana and Ghanaians, not only to mitigate this pandemic, but to implement programs that will transform our country. We should change our approach to our development and dare to do the impossible. Under the leadership of President Akufo-Addo and informed by broad consultations, we have prepared the Ghana COVID-19 Alleviation and Revitalization of Enterprises Support, the Ghana Cares Obatampa program, for this very purpose. Mr. Speaker, the Ghana Cares Obatampa program is an unprecedented, bold, and audacious 100 billion program for us to reimagine and re-envision our future like never before. It is sequenced in two phases, Mr. Speaker: a stabilization phase that runs from July to the end of the year 2020, and a medium-term revitalization phase will accelerate the Ghana Beyond Aid transformation agenda. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I wish to highlight the main elements of each phase of the program. Mr. Speaker, the stabilization phase of the Ghana Cares Obatampa program would ensure food security, protect businesses and worker incomes, strengthen the health system, and attract private investments and support Ghanaian businesses. Mr. Speaker, government will intensify support for farmers through the Planting for Food and Jobs and Rain for Food and Jobs program, will aggressively facilitate access to financing the rice millers to enable them to purchase paddy from rice farmers. In addition, will provide financial support to the National Buffer Stock Company and Ghana Commodity Exchange to enable them stores and trade stocks as needed to smoothing out supplies on the market. Mr. Speaker, government will inject liquidity into a system to ease cash flow difficulties of businesses and protect workers by honoring obligations, contractors and suppliers in a timely manner. Building on recent good experience of sourcing from the pharmaceutical and textile and garment sectors, government will expand procurement from local producers for its goods and services. Mr. Speaker, we are mindful of the fact that some businesses may have to shed some labor in order to survive. In the unlikely event that this happens, government through the Ministry of Employment and Labor Relations is collaborating with social partners, labor and employers to establish a national unemployment insurance scheme. The scheme will provide temporary income support to workers that are laid off and also provide them access to retraining to help them take advantage of employment opportunities in new fields. Mr. Speaker, government will soon roll out an emergency preparedness and response plan 2, which will enable us to continue strengthening the health system. Mr. Speaker, government will, over the course of this year, work with this August House to pass a number of legislations that will provide a strong framework to raise the funds, attract the investment necessary for the revitalization and transformation phase of the Ghana Cares program, and rationalize and strengthen support to SMEs. This would include bills on tax exemption, public-private partnership, the Ghana Investment Promotion Center, development finance institutions, home ownership financing, and enterprise Ghana. Mr. Speaker, over the medium term, 2021 to 2023, government's plan is to implement the phase 2 of the Ghana Cares Obatampa program, which will revitalize and transform the economy. The main focus will be to accelerate implementation of the Ghana Beyond Aid agenda. In our economic revitalization and transformation, government will take resolute measures to improve the business environment for the private sector. Specific measures to be implemented include significant improvements in business regulations and their implementation, digitization to improve quality and transparency of public service delivery, expanding access to finance for Ghanaian businesses, skills training, and energy sector reform. Mr. Speaker, we all know that a plan is only as good as its implementation. It is not enough to raise the money. So for the Ghana Cares program, execution will have to be the watchwords. The Ghana Cares Revitalization and Transformation Agenda is about national survival and security, just like our response to the COVID-19 pandemic itself. Therefore, we need to approach it as such, with a resolute focus on implementation. We'll have to pursue a whole of government development approach and in close collaboration with and support to the private sector, and we will make sure they happen. Mr. Speaker, I crave your indulgence to remind this House that we inherited an economy characterized by the slowest economic growth. In conclusion, by the slowest economic growth rate for the last 30 years, since 1990. We were equipped with an economy that was choking on the largest nominal fiscal slippage since independence, with underperforming revenues, battling against the insatiable appetite of an overspending government, surrounded by a mountain range of billions of arrears, about half of which turned out to be dubious. We took over a treasury stymied in high debt burden, a derailed IMF program, forlornly expected to be corrected by the same government that had lost touch with the plight and aspirations of our people, and lost track of its own program of action. Thankfully, the Lord has steered us past that. Mr. Speaker, to restore the dignity and hope of Ghanaians and put the economy back on track, in fulfillment of our manifesto, we put in place carefully sequenced programs of macroeconomic adjustment and consolidation, remove nuisance taxes to boost production, introduced revenue-enhancing measures, implemented growth-inducing interventions, supported the private sector, and rolled out the most ambitious, comprehensive, and far-reaching social policies implemented by any government in the past half a century. Mr. Speaker, 2019 signaled the year of Ghana's return in many ways. With the IMF program behind us, hundreds of millions of arrears owed to road contractors paid, the economy became booming with a growth rate of 6.5%, inflation tamed at 7.9%, a trade surplus of 2.2 billion, and fiscal deficit under control at 4.7%, and a positive primary balance of 0.8%. We ended the year confidently on the path of economic transformation and anchored on impressive macroeconomic indicators. Then suddenly, Mr. Speaker, the whole world was struck by the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Speaker, the good people of Ghana, and indeed the world, recognize that the President was swift to respond with a 100 million preparedness plan and has since shown bold, decisive, and compassionate leadership in navigating this uncertainty with calm and calming authority. Under his leadership, we have instituted a comprehensive emergency plan that is sharply focused on saving lives and livelihoods, averting economic collapse, building resilience, and strengthening the pillars of the economic system for a new normal. We are confident that together, all of us will come through this stronger as one people with a common destiny. In the words of that astounding American statesman, it is not the critic who counts. It is not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes out short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Mr. Speaker, we shall forge ahead. Mr. Speaker, for us, governance is all about the well-being of the people. We have been elected to serve. Ours is the government for the ordinary people. That is why, since 2017, we have spent a total of 900 million in keeping nearly 110,000 trainee teachers and trainee nurses in training. We are for the ordinary Ghanaians. That is why until schools were forced to close down, we were feeding 2.9 million children every day, 78% more than 1.6 million who were fed in 2017. We are in government for every family in Ghana, no matter where you are. That is why we have spent $3 billion to provide free education for 1.2 million high school students and TVET students. We connect with the aspirations of hardworking Ghanaians looking for a push to start or support their small businesses. That is why 90,000 young people have been trained and some funded to start up their own businesses under NEIP. In addition, 97,876 Ghanaians have seen their businesses benefiting from some 100 million cedis credit facility so far disbursed by Maslow since 2017. We feel the desperation of young graduates struggling to land jobs. That is why we have invested $1.6 billion to recruit 100,000 of them under NAPCO. Mr. Speaker, the evidence is all around us. With all the difficulties that the Akufo administration have had to endure and overcome since January 2017, we stayed focused on the all-important task of making government work for every Ghanaian. We remember also well how the previous government, after imposing the inconvenient and income-sapping doomsday on households and businesses for 5 years, and insensitively increased electricity prices first by 89%, then by 10%, then by 78%, and 20%, and finally by 59% between 2010 and 2015 alone. It took courage, Mr. Speaker, and care for President Akufo-Addo to do what no other government have been able to do before, which is a net reduction of electricity tariffs by 11% since 2017. Such is a high level of care today, that today, nearly 4 years in office, electricity prices for Ghanaians, households and businesses all included, remain cheaper in both nominal and real terms than what they were before 2017. Mr. Speaker, the reason it's simple, it is because we put the concerns and aspirations of the ordinary Ghanaian first. That is also why we further reduce electricity prices by half and completely provide a portable water for free for everybody since March this year. And we will extend it for another 3 months. To break it down, Mr. Speaker, it takes a caring government of the people, and with that, I mean a government of all the people, to offer cost-free water to all across the country, representing all domestic and commercial customers in Ghana for 3 months. Mr. Speaker, it takes a caring government to be for the people and for business, large and small, to choose to subsidize electricity consumption by 50% to 4 million households and nearly 700,000 businesses at a cost of $1 billion in 3 months, and we will extend the coverage for lifeline customers for another 3 months. Mr. Speaker, it takes a caring government to hear the distress of business and respond with support to small and medium businesses to the tune of 600 million cedis in order to help them survive and thrive in these uncertain times. The CAP bus will be increased by 150 million cedis to help many more SMEs, including 50 million for the creative arts industry, the media, and private universities. It takes a caring government to establish a guarantee scheme of up to 2 billion Ghana cedis to enable businesses to borrow from banks at more affordable rates and at longer tenor to save their businesses and retain jobs. This will be established. Mr. Speaker, it takes a caring government to provide seed funding to set up retraining and skills improvement program in partnership with labor and employers and with pay-based organizations. The seed fund will help workers who are laid off to either improve their skills or acquire new skills to improve their chances of finding new employment or set up their own businesses. Mr. Speaker, it takes a caring government to partner with labor employers to initiate an unemployment insurance scheme to provide temporary income support to workers when they lose their jobs. Mr. Speaker, it takes a caring government and its central bank to create an environment for the banks to provide 7 billion cedis to help their clients through loan restructurings, interest rate reductions, and granting of new facilities and offering of moratoria on debt servicing. Going forward, government and Bank of Ghana will work with the banks to extend some of these reliefs. This current government, Mr. Speaker, provided over 2.74 million cooked and dry foods to the poor and vulnerable persons in Accra and Kumasi during the 3-day lockdown. Today, government has paid 75.4 million as full cost cover for WASI examinations for all 313,837 SHS3 students. This is a caring government. A responsive and caring government is one that with urgency and military precision managed to fund and provide the logistical support to supply 5.2 million reusable face masks, 64,700 Veronica buckets, accompanying sanitizers to all final year students at tertiary, senior, and junior high schools levels in Ghana to return to school and write their examinations. A responsible and caring government is one that sees it as necessary to show support and appreciation to the 137,000 health workers with reliefs valued at 320 million and provide insurance cover for them. Mr. Speaker, the future is about digitalization. Data is now becoming as essential as water and electricity, especially for our youth and businesses. The COVID-19 pandemic has reaffirmed this, especially as more people work remotely and also access education and health services. This caring government, Mr. Speaker, has worked diligently to digitalize the economy over the last 3.5 years. We need to further speed up the digitalization effort, where every citizen nationwide has access to the internet and other digital services. As such, going forward, government will work with the telcos and the Electricity Company of Ghana to roll out fiber across the country on the back of the electricity distribution network, so every citizen nationwide, Mr. Speaker, will have access to high-speed broadband. In the short term, Mr. Speaker, we'll reduce the communication sales tax CST from 9% to 5%. We will reduce the CST tax from 9% to 5% to reduce the cost of communication service to the consumer. As more and more people work remotely and utilize online services, we will count on the telcos to match this reduction in the CST by reducing their tariffs. This is important for our youth, entrepreneurs, and the burgeoning fintech industry. Mr. Speaker, Ghana has been hit with a double shock, a health pandemic and global economic recession. These have resulted in revenue shortfalls of 13.6 billion and unanticipated but necessary expenditures of approximately 11.7 billion. This will result in a projected fiscal deficit, Mr. Speaker, of 11.4% of GDP. This is above the 5% limit as stated in the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2018, Act 982. Mr. Speaker, Ghana is not unique in this regard. The pandemic has caused other countries, including the 26 countries in the EU, and Brazil, Jamaica, Costa Rica, etc., to suspend their fiscal rules in 2020 in light of their sharply increased fiscal deficits. Mr. Speaker, given our history, our government history of fiscal rectitude, it is with great difficulty that we are having to suspend our fiscal rule due to exogenous factors. We intend to return to compliance with the FRA in the shortest possible time. Mr. Speaker, to ensure that we do not only survive this pandemic, but recover and thrive. This government is rolling out the 3.5-year Ghana Cares Recovery and Revitalization Program. The Coronavirus Alleviation and Revitalization of Enterprises Support Program, or BATAMPA program, allows us to recreate our economy and set it on a course that we yearn for. It will involve an investment, Mr. Speaker, of 100 billion Ghana cedis from 2021 to 2023, of which 70 billion will come from the private sector and 30 billion from the public sector. Mr. Speaker, we consider the CARES program truly groundbreaking, as it requires radical reforms in government, particularly in revenue generation, and a radical improvement in doing business for the private sector. It also adopts a whole-of-government implementation approach and fosters closer collaboration with the private sector to give a sustainable future to Ghanaians, as captured earlier. Mr. Speaker, as you can see, every aspect of the lives of Ghanaians will be dramatically impacted with the implementation of this program, ranging from what we eat to where we live to where we work. Mr. Speaker, government will vigorously promote the consumption of locally produced goods and services in order to support local businesses and generate employment. To this end, MDAs and MMDAs will be required, Mr. Speaker, to prioritize the procurement of local goods and services, and our Public Procurement Authority and Central Tender Review Committees shall be so instructed. The aim is to generate local demand and consumption with the full force of government's procurement capacity to ensure that most of government procurements will be sourced locally. Mr. Speaker, we are in extraordinary times, which calls for extraordinary leadership. Accordingly, on behalf of the President of the Republic, I have presented to you an extraordinary mid-year fiscal policy review that seeks to reorganize our public finances to protect lives, secure incomes, revitalize businesses, and focus our energies on driving the economy back on track to building a Ghana beyond aid. It involves a recognition that the solutions to Ghana's problems lie with Ghanaians, and that with inspiring leadership, Ghanaians can find a way to address their own challenges. Let me reiterate, Mr. Speaker, the President's plan for the next 3.5 years. 1. An unprecedented 100 billion Ghana Cares or BATAMPA program to transform and modernize our economy. 2. For the next 6 months, reduce CST from 9% to 5%. B. Establish a 2 billion guarantee facility to support all sectors of business and job retention to get appropriate loans. C. Establish an unemployment insurance scheme. D. Create a 100 million CD fund for labor and faith-based organizations for retraining and skills development. Increase the CAPAS program by 150 million CDs to, among others, facilitate credit of 50 million to support the creative arts, the media, and the Conference of Independent Universities. F. Retain provision of free water for the next 3 months. Retain free, and finally, Mr. Speaker, retain free electricity for all Lifeline customers for the rest of the year. The agenda of the President is to modernize Ghana for all Ghanaians. Thankfully, Mr. Speaker, the agenda of the government is to modernize Ghana for all Ghanaians. Thankfully, Mr. Speaker, this leader, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, is only in his first term in office. Mr. Speaker, before I finally conclude, let me pay tribute to all Ghanaians who have endured the difficult and drastic fallouts from the ravages of this virus, an unknown enemy. Enduring lockdown, social distancing, mandatory wearing of masks, to taking our entrepreneurial spirit in our hands have proven the can-do spirit of the Ghanaian. Our endurance is emblematic of the biblical Job who persevered in the hope that God will show him at the right time. Together with James, the brother of Jesus, in James chapter 1 verse 4, I will say to them, let endurance complete its work, so that you may be complete and sound in all respects, not lacking, Mr. Speaker, in anything. Mr. Speaker, as often repeated by the President, this too shall pass. I'm confident that with government working closely with this House, we will emerge from this crisis even more united and purposeful. As Ghanaians, I'm confident that with the government working closely with this House, we will emerge from this crisis even more united and purposeful as Ghanaians to fulfill our manifest destiny as a Black Star of Africa. Mr. Speaker, this media fiscal policy review and its programs draws us closer to our collective aspirations. While this pandemic requires us to exceed the limits imposed by the FRA Act 982, we have had to make these major expenditures to protect lives and livelihood of Ghanaians and sustain businesses. We therefore request a supplementary budget of 11,896,477,566 cedis to enable us to continue this extraordinary task. Mr. Speaker, before I take my seat, allow me to express sincere gratitude for the enormous support this House has extended me since taking office. I truly appreciate the long hours honorable members of Parliament sat through, considering and passing key bills and measures for the Asempa budget in 2017, the Jumapa budget in 2018, the Impontu budget of 2019, and the Nkoso and Kabum budget of 2020, and now the Obatampa program. Mr. Speaker, the task ahead is great, yet it is a noble and glorious challenge. A challenge, Mr. Speaker, which calls for the courage to dream, the courage to believe, the courage to dare, and the courage to do. The courage to work and the courage to attain excellence in achievement. As a government, we have dared to dream. We have dared to dream, we have dared to believe, to work, and to achieve. Mr. Speaker, this caring government shall continue, in the words of Job, to be the eyes of the blind, the feet of the lame, and the father of the needy, and champion against injustice for all and traders. Wherever it rears its ugly head, let us as a nation, Mr. Speaker, choose joy and know that He will restore the years that the locust has eaten. Mr. Speaker, the Lord indeed reigns. Clearly we can and would do more with the privilege of service to God and country. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. for attending to the House to move the motion on the mid-year review of the budget statement and economic policy of the government of Ghana for the 2020 financial year. I trust that the amendment to the Communication Service Tax Law will be brought to the House as soon as possible. You will please table the appropriate document. Honourable members, debate on the motion shall stand deferred. The part of the supplementary estimates relating to revenue and expenditure shall stand committed to the Financial Committee in accordance with orders 140 sub 5 and 143. Honourable Majority Leader, any indication, please?
Mr. Speaker, as you said, the Minister has submitted two documents, a mid-year review and supplementary estimates. Speaker, the other one, the supplementary document that also relates to the advancement from the contingency fund. I think all of them have been rolled into one and they've come to us for consideration. The figures required of us by Order 143. The debate on this would be stood down until Monday, and when we commence debate on the principles. And then, Speaker, I believe we'll be able to conclude on it on Tuesday or worst case scenario, Wednesday, where perhaps the debate will be limited to the minority leader and myself to conclude. If it is possible to find space, we may conclude Tuesday. But other than that, we'll conclude on Wednesday. The Speaker, so we will stand it down, and the Minister has been on the street for 2 hours, 15 minutes, and we believe that the issues involved are quite loaded, and it requires all of us to peruse the document and analyze what he has submitted to us, so that going forward we'll be able to make a determination as to approve the request or not to approve the request. The Speaker, it being past 3 o'clock, and indeed our normal sitting hours ends up at 2 o'clock, but it's past 3 o'clock. Adjournment, the Speaker, will rest with you. So depending on what the minority leader would say, we can't take an adjournment after this and come to continue tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the forenoon. The Speaker, thank you very much.
Honourable Minority Leader, any response, please?
Speaker, with this caring sermon from a desperate and failing government of care. Mr. Speaker, with this caring sermon from a manifestly desperate and failing government.
What sermon? I didn't hear the word.
Speaker, the sermon of the finance.
You use an adjective for the sermon.
Caring. Mr. Speaker, he launched caring sermon.
Scary sermon.
Yes, caring. Because his Obatampa care program, Obatampa, not Obatamboshe. Obatampa, not Obatamboshe. Mr. Speaker, he counts to me more with Obatampa, not Obatamboshe. He counts to me more with pledges and promises of a manifesto than a mid-year review of a desperate and failing government. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, we are in your hands, and I'm guided by Proverbs 6, verse 16 to 19. Mr. Speaker, we are in your able hands, having listened to the Minister for Finance, whose promises and pledges in paragraph 412 talks about 2021 to 2023, a future which is unknown to him. The Ghanaian businesses and individuals were expecting relief today. With that Obatamboshe, with this Obatamboshe, not Obatampa, into the future, we are in your hands.
Honorable Minority Leader, this Honorable House will stand adjourned to tomorrow, 10 o'clock in the morning. Thank you.